I'm just waiting for the live thing. Okay, so we should be live now. All right, we're live. Late as usual, gay as usual. Boxes checked. That's fine though. I told everyone about the stream and no one's here yet. So it looks like there was nobody who was waiting and then got disappointed and left in the 10 minutes. So I think we did the ideal thing. But anyway, I'm here with Ashley. We want to talk about this article called The Logic of Bell Curve Leftism. And whatever else we want to talk about.
Yeah.
What I'm
So
echoing already. Got it.
I think there's a few technical issues that, well, there are ambiguities in the way it's written that are kind of a problem. So, like, if you skip to, I don't know if you have that article up just now, The Logic of Bell Curve Leftism, it's called.
Oh, right, I can share it because StreamYard actually makes it quite convenient to share things. Let me just I think it needs to be in its own window. Maybe that's not even true. Share. I guess I can share my screen and then select a window. Okay.
Right.
And that picture really hits home what he's going to be hitting at. Look at all those kiddos laughing at the stupid idiot sleeping in front. He must be low IQ, and communism is going to save him. And what they're doing is wrong. They're judgments. They're snickering judgments. They're evil capitalist prioritization of things like intelligence. It's arbitrary. How dare they?
So this is the problem. I think a few paragraphs down, if you just Control F the word chess, this really gets to the crux of the issue. So he says, we can admire the astonishing ability of a master chess player or a gifted coder, but we need not see them as somehow better human beings. So the interesting thing about this is the word better is confusing.
Yeah.
He keeps using the word morality in this and talking about moral questions. But I think what this comes down to is basically the matter of axiology, which includes moral concerns but isn't limited to moral concerns. I think with moral concerns, so just to differentiate, a moral value, if you say that something is morally, questions of morality usually involve some kind of injunction that implies that you would like a behavior to be completely eliminated from society, ideally. Not always, but that's usually the case. So if you
Right.
say, if
Oh,
you
sorry, you're gonna
say,
give an example.
yeah, if you say thou shalt not steal, that implies that the um, the ideal would be a situation where nobody steals anything. So that's one thing that defines a moral question, and something
Well,
that
but yeah, I mean,
and
the
each
interesting
yeah.
thing though is that even maps onto the way I split things up. Because like your example is something I'd consider ethical, but it obviously carries the injunction because like the ethics clearly can't because all of those are basically nothing but like admonishments. But then for morality, you could do it another way where you're like, okay, well, saying that it's like virtuous to like wake up early in the morning and run a mile for your fitness, right? It's a considerate thing to do for people around you who care about you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, etc., right? And then you could flip that and then say, well, this implies that there's an ideal of like eliminating like bad health, right? In a way.
Right. And another thing that would differentiate it, so axiology is the study of value, which includes moral values and injunctions like the kind I just mentioned, which can be defined, roughly speaking, in terms of would it be good, would you be prepared to say it would be good for the world if this behavior was just completely gone, or this, whatever it may be, right? Something that distinguishes morality from other axiological issues, other forms of value that wouldn't normally be called moral, but they're still in the domain of shoulds and oughts, they're still questions of value, would be, say, I don't know, pragmatism or efficiency. Like, say, for example, um, should you build a duck house using modern tools, or should you build it using traditional, I don't know, Anglo-Saxon methods? It depends on what you're trying to do and what kind of value you're trying to explicate. If you just want it to get built quickly, if you value speed or efficiency or something, then you should obviously use modern tools. But if you're trying to do something like authenticity, adhering to an authentic mode of building as it would have been done historically, then you might produce different answers. So, and another thing that's interesting to iron out is that there's this distinction between positional versus absolute goods. So, for instance, a Japanese person in Imperial Japan might say, we should revere the emperor, we should admire the emperor, we should aspire to emulate the emperor's various virtues. But that doesn't mean they want everybody to be the emperor. Indeed, that would be a sort of a contradiction in terms almost, because what makes the emperor special is their uniqueness. It's the fact that only one person can be that. So the reason I went to such lengths to explicate all this is because they're using this term better, and it's like there's a kind of so I would agree with them if, for example, they were saying that, let's just take the issue of attractiveness instead of intelligence. I would agree that we shouldn't punish people. Sorry, hang on a
No, you're good.
hello, sorry, I disappeared.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So if he was just saying we shouldn't punish people as a society for being unattractive, something like that, in the sense of, because I think there is a worthy distinction there, in the sense of positively trying to make someone's life more miserable, right? I agree that we shouldn't do that, but that's not the same thing as merely treating an attractive person differently from an unattractive person. For instance,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with saying sanely you should hire attractive people to be salespeople in your company to sell cars or whatever, because you will probably get more car sales. It's probably not a very large effect, but I think that's perfectly rational. And I don't think that constitutes some grand injustice, even though it could be perceived in that way, because you are sort of elevating them to a higher status in some sense. And they're sort of exploiting that ambiguity where he says, we don't need to see them as somehow better human beings. Um, there's there's a nuance in philosophy called performative versus logical contradiction. Whereas, just to give an example of this in ethics, you could say that if somebody watches, I don't know, really old porn videos, like the performers are all dead or something, so you're not giving any existing person any attention for it. The sort of attention economy with ethos and such, and you're not financially contributing to it in any way.
Wait,
So,
I just want to clarify. Are you talking about a hypothetical person who does this deliberately out of spite towards ebots? Because that's amazing.
well, no, I'm getting there. I'm getting
That
there.
should be a
So
movie. Oh my God.
I'm
Yeah, but
just
I'm
like,
listening.
so you could say that there isn't a logical contradiction between that behavior and saying that porn is immoral, producing porn is immoral, or acting in porn is immoral, or something like that, because they're not actually contributing to it, right, in any
They
way.
have to also steal the porn.
Sure, yes, like pirating or whatever, right?
Oh yeah, and they can't steal it physically either, because if they steal it physically, they've decreased the supply and therefore increased its value. So they have to actually steal a strictly digital copy, which
Mhm.
they own. It's actually not stealing. If you
Right,
own a device
but
that can create a copy of a thing, you own the copy. Like that's just logical.
the
I don't know why
point,
that's so hard for people, but sorry.
yeah,
Yeah.
the
Funny. He
point
does
is
that.
this isn't a logical contradiction, but I think most people would rankle at it somewhat still, because there is a kind of performative contradiction or a kind of psychic contradiction between condemning a behavior and also taking pleasure from it. You know, in an autistic sense, you could say that there's no logical contradiction there, but it is still a kind of contradiction or something that could be problematic, I
That's
think.
really hard to pin down though. Like I get what you're mean. I get what you mean, and I think the logical half of it is fine, right? That's quite clear. But the second part of it, it's like, oh, but it's a performative contradiction. I see what you're pointing to, and I can see like the general outline of it, but you know what I mean? That one's kind of hazy.
Yeah,
Like, right? It's very
that
hazy.
well, that might just be my not choosing an ideal case, but we can
Well, let me
transfer
wait,
it.
wait, let me try though. Let me try to make it like a very silly example and see if that makes it clearer. Because like, what if instead it was like, it's like saying, we're gonna condemn him for scratching an itch because it's not good to be itchy, right? But it's like, oh no, but I get itchy, and there's actually this like crazy conglomerate toxic culture surrounding back scratchers and like celebrity back scratchers and ones that are signed and all this weird shit and blah blah blah. And like I made my own back scratchers. I made my own and I scratched my own back with my own. As my ethical alternative, right? So it's really, I don't know. Like I think, and then but then like it's that's just being human. Like that quote unquote performative contradiction. That's just the duality of man, right? That's just that's
Right.
just scratching itches all the way down, right?
Well, I don't think it really matters for the. It was probably a bad case to use, but that's just to set up what I'm trying to say here.
I still like that character though.
hmm So, on the one hand, you could say that um, they're just talking about a moral case where they're basically just saying, don't bully people for being ugly, for example, which is obviously uncontroversial and nobody would disagree with it. Or you could take intelligence or any trait, right? And that would be uncontroversial. But that's one interpretation. The other interpretation, and the reason this made me angry, although this could just be a misinterpretation, but this is why it made me angry, is that it sounds like they're saying, because of this ambiguity, it could be read as saying that we should just eliminate all axiological language from everyday life. Like you're supposed to just sort of somehow purge yourself of, you're never allowed to say that someone is better at maths than you, for instance, because if you say that someone's a better mathematician than you, then that's, you know, morally dysfunctional in some way because you're imputing a greater value to them in some sense. And I agree that
No,
in
yeah, but they
some
they can't
sense
do
you are.
that. It doesn't. It does.
Yeah.
You can't purge all axiology because then he loses the case for he's making a case for like a better society. There's already axiology there, right? So he's only eliminating in like a specific context or in specific ways. And I guess that would be in regard to you could say maybe to immutable character or immutable human characteristics, right? That you try to eliminate axiological judgments on that level, which is essentially, to put it in modern parlance, like that's just the whole ableism thing, right?
Well, the
When you
reason,
condemn
so,
ableism, you
okay,
say, okay, let's say you can fly. Is that not preferable? Yes. Oh, you're saying people who can't fly deserve to die or whatever, right? Like that's the leap they're making, right? But when they say like, oh, a person who's a master chess player like is better, it's like, well, yeah, when you make that judgment, what you're doing is you create two people that are otherwise identical. One of them is also a master chess player relative to the other one, right? And that's better. Like, just like
yes,
if you're the same but now you can fly, that's better. Like,
yeah, and that doesn't mean you're punishing the person who isn't a chess grandmaster. Like it's a total non sequitur, right?
he might be arguing that we do punish them in society, and that's right. That's what he'd be getting at, right?
Well,
Um,
no, because this is why I mentioned the positional versus absolute goods thing. He would say, I think, unless I'm getting this wrong, that um, the fact that, let's say, more intelligent people get paid more money than unintelligent people, he would say that that status difference in itself constitutes a kind of punishment of the lesser person, the less
Oh,
intelligent
sure, but
person.
that's
And I
that's
don't
just
agree
classic
with that.
left. Yeah, but that's all leftism. All leftism is based on that entitlement.
Yeah, exactly. It's insane. And I can
Yeah.
get it. I can get into that. It's like,
So he's
so
just
the
applying
reason
that classic entitlement there, and then I can totally see how that links up. Yep,
the
it's a
reason I'm
mess.
the reason I made the distinction between logical versus performative sense making, let's call it that, that's a good idea, is that in a sort of logical autistic way, you could make the case that, oh yeah, we can just purge all our values, all axiological language from everyday life. You can't say that someone's a better mathematician than you. You can just coldly say things like, I don't know, they had a higher score on the test than I did. I don't know, something like that. But even then, that's impossible because even the concept of high and low is encoded with axiological language. So I just think he's asking so goddamn much of human beings, um, practically, psychically, even if there's some moral or logical case to be made for it. It's just horrendously unpragmatic.
Isn't that ironic too, right? Because they're trying to make the whole case for, let's make it easier on people who are maybe less intelligent, and
Yeah. But then the evil just spirals from there, it just gets even more evil. Because what he actually is saying is that he says we shouldn't reward, and this is like a logical implication of this trying to like remove all axiology, is that he says we shouldn't reward the more virtuous. We shouldn't reward the intelligence, the intelligent or the genius or the chess grandmaster or whatever with acclaim or with riches or anything, because that wouldn't be equal. And he goes on to say that we should redistribute their wealth to the masses. And he even argues that they don't need to be incentivized. Control F incentivized. He actually says that. It's not a straw man.
all right. So De Boer believes the smart will do fine under any system and don't need to be incentivized, and their disproportionate gains in our increasingly knowledge-based economy can simply be redistributed to everyone else. In fact, the transformation in the economic rewards of intelligence, they keep increasing at an alarming rate as we leave physical labor behind, is not just not a problem. It is, in fact, what will make human happiness finally possible. This is kind of, I think though there is a
Evil.
little bit of editorializing, and like I don't think that this particular article seems well written. I wish that we had the actual book, I guess, but I mean I don't.
Yeah. If you take it at face value, though, do you agree with me that it's deeply evil?
I mean, yeah, well, ending meritocracy, like to me, the idea of I feel like there needs to be a little bit more scrutiny with slaying people's axiologies, particularly meritocracy. What is that? Rewarding things that are good, that are
Yes.
better, that have merit, right? It's kind of like a really wholesome core sort of an axiological thing to have. The condemnation, like whenever people condemn meritocracy, they're condemning a false perception of meritocracy, right? And that's always their argument, is that your system isn't properly identifying it, and then it's falsely calling things meritocratic when it's not, right? Like that to me is how I've always taken those arguments against meritocracy, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So they're trying
this
to.
is a literal end to the idea. This is saying no, like we don't care that they're worse. You're wrong for having the judgment, which it's a yeah, I yeah, evil is a good word for it. I mean, it's also quite fascinating.
Yeah. Um. So, like, for instance,
Wait, before we continue, I
like,
just wonder if we should read like a little more of it in general. It's a little longish.
can I
I don't
just
know.
rant a bit? I'll finish my rant about it.
Sure.
So, the there is obviously a reason why, and this is an appeal to tradition, but I think it is good to appeal to traditions because our ancestors, they lived in a world that was significantly more real than ours, and so they had to have a certain amount of realness and seriousness and balls that we increasingly lack and just believe things that they would have found totally insane. all societies throughout human history have had these kinds of status distinctions and hierarchies, which aren't quote unquote chosen, but then we can get into that as well. Because human beings need this kind of encouragement and incentivization, even if you take the case of geniuses or the highly intelligent. I know that there are some highly intelligent people who are extremely motivated, self motivated. And in the Christian tradition, there's this notion of hagiography, of sainthood, of these people who can just go into the desert and not like the monks who would live in communities with other monks that would sort of keep each other in check and hold standards on each other with that community guidance and structure. So these saints would go into the desert and just completely commit themselves to Jesus and being in touch with God and whatever, and being an ascetic and detaching from worldly pleasures and whatever. But the precise reason that those people were saints and that they are so revered and are considered so incredible is because this is impossible for most people. It isn't possible for the overwhelming majority of people, whatever other virtues they have, to be that self motivated and to not need encouragement or incentives. I do have some faith in human nature, but not that much faith. People just aren't that self motivated, um, even geniuses. So this idea that, oh, we can just get rid of any status distinctions because it wouldn't be equal, and this leftist thing of, oh, boo-hoo, it wouldn't be equal, and redistribute everything, and then just expect society to continue making intellectual progress or any other kind of progress. I just think it's insane. Did that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially the first part, right, about like the older people and I guess people closer to nature in some ways, right? That they're like closer to everything, dealing with things practically with their hands, right? And it's like the degree to which life is more like brutal and like direct in that way. It's sort of like over time we've had the luxury of kind of retreating back into like a cave, right? And then
Mm,
that's where like they start to get these kinds of like crazy ideas. Um,
mm,
but yeah, it is kind of. I mean, it's a good point to make that like people naturally forming status distinctions really saves a huge headache
yeah,
and really kind of helps organize a lot of things that otherwise get taken for granted. And like the really insulting part about like most communist perspectives, in my opinion, just seems to be that like there's really absolutely no they never lay it out in like an administrative way, right? They never
yeah,
actually tell you like here's the real how of it. They say just like this from the top down is what should happen, right? Now to be clear, from my perspective, I don't offer that kind of a justification because my worldview isn't based on fucking controlling everything. But if I had it was based on controlling everything, I'd say, okay, well here's how the administration is going to have to look. Here's a proposed idea for it, or at least here's how we're going to go about building that thing. But like it's always like they always complain about how everything's not real communism because it's actually corporatism, but it's like it's always outsourced to a corporation because that's the only way to get anything fucking done. Like
yeah,
it's always gonna happen that way. Like there's you're just gonna shuffle around a few labels on it and pretend it's technically not a corporation, but then you're gonna complain that it's not real communism because it's still de facto a corporation anyway. It's just
yeah.
uh,
But then there's one more thing before you can. Well, I have to get all my thoughts out, and then I guess you can read the bits you want to read, and guess add your thoughts if you have anything to add. So there are two things going on. There's just the standard leftist allergy to hierarchy. I think we've hashed that out pretty well, or I have. Um, and then there's another thing going on, which is maybe more contentious, which is determinism. So what he wants to do is he wants to use heredity studies of intelligence to home in on a trait and say that, well, that isn't chosen, it's determined, and therefore we have to manipulate and manhandle society in these unspeakably evil ways. Um, the problem is that how many human differences you would actually have to redistribute or equalize on this basis, I think he's severely underestimating. Well, it would be all of it, in fact, since there's a strong genetic basis to every single human behavior. And leftists say that, or that, well, okay, this guy, he thinks that if a behavior is determined, then it's unfair to reward someone for it. That's the basic argument. And in this case, he's talking about genetic determinism. But the thing is, you don't even have to believe in genetic determinism to see the problems with this, because even if all behavior was environmentally determined or random,
That's still determined,
yeah,
right? Like,
environmental determinism is still determinism because you don't choose your environment. And obviously, randomness is still random. So, like, as I'm producing this sentence right now to go to the free will determinism thing, I don't carefully choose and curate every single word before speaking it. The words are just retrieved from my memory via a process which is completely unconscious and which I don't control. So I don't even agree with people when they say we have the illusion of free will. I'm not even convinced that we have that. So this is the problem with trying to draw a distinction, which is what he's trying to do, and which loads of people commit this fallacy. I certainly see it as a fallacy between chosen virtues and so-called unchosen virtues, or sorry, chosen so-called chosen virtues versus unchosen virtues. Because the more you examine things, the more you realize that probably nothing is really chosen or authored by us in any sense that's actually important. So I think all this hereditarian leftist stuff and leftism in general, it just seems like a weird cope to avoid confronting one, determinism, and two, the necessity of hierarchy. Like, for some reason, they just can't deal with, like, they think that if a person with an IQ of 180 is seen as being superior in some sense, in some sense, to someone with an IQ of 80, that's like the end of the world for some reason. But of course, it isn't the end of the world because no society before ours has ever had a problem with it. I've accepted it. Most civilizations and cultures believed some people were superior to others, and that some people were just fated by heredity or the gods or whatever to be superior or to be inferior. And they didn't explode. They didn't vanish into a puff of smoke. They just got on with their lives. So it's just a weird neurosis that the leftist seems unable to shake. And that's all there is to it.
I wonder if part of it too is that like it could be one person who's like, "Oh, I think that person's really smart," right? But like they take that as or they're always looking at it in the sorry, they're always looking at it as like a broad social judgment, right? It's like if one person thinks it, everyone thinks it, like it's like the hive mind kind of thing. Not to say they literally think that, but I think they're like predisposed to kind of view everything in that way, right? If
Well,
one person has a thought, then it's contagious,
I,
right?
I
And that's
think,
like the
I
atomic
think,
level for them. It's never just like, and I think that if there was more of an accepting of the fact that people are going to have different judgments, right? And that's okay. It's good to have a variety of judgments in that regard, right? It's okay for it to be a little bit subjective.
yeah.
It really makes it a lot less stressful, right? Like
Well, I
you can just find someone else that sees the value, you know?
I think it's fair to say that most people probably do see a 180 IQ super genius as being superior to them in some sense, right? In some sense of the word superior. I'm just saying, so what? Like who cares? Some people are superior to me, and that's fine. I'm fine with having superiors.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, well, and that's the thing too, is like everybody has superiors in some regard or another, you know?
Mm.
And it's like endless. Like you could even say, okay, you have a job with an employer, right? So like they are expressing a value in the labor, right? That other employers are not. You know what I mean? It's like we live in this duality constantly. Like it's just it literally it just applies endlessly to everything, and like it's fine. It's always been fine. Like, or at least it hasn't ended the world, right? Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that I could just see somebody like listening to the stream though and being like they didn't read the article, right? So maybe there's something that's worth bringing up in particular, but like I think that it's a little bit slow paced. The first couple paragraphs I don't think matter. Doot, doot, doot. And then like I don't care about his grandma. Um Here we go. Here we go. Like this is kind of the heart of it. When they write, what De Boer tries to do is explain how our current culture and political system is geared to torment, distress, and punish this kid for no fault of his own. This is the cult of smart, De Boer proclaims. It is the notion that academic value is the only value, and intelligence is the only true measure of human worth. It is pernicious. It is cruel. It must change. Okay, so actually, you know what? This is an important point, right? Um, they're saying intelligence in particular is like a supreme or like omnipotent or all-encompassing value in our culture. And I don't know. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but I think definitely it's up there, right?
Mm.
Um, I think the argument was based in it being, quote unquote, like knowledge-based society. But I mean, to what degree is that? I mean, I suppose if you just map IQ, right, directly onto people's like general success in life, in general that kind of checks out with uh some hairy bits. Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how much that saves the argument though. It seems because that to me just seems like a pretty big concession. I guess to the degree to which that's the case. Maybe that's the argument is he's saying anytime there's one axiology that's like monopolizing everything, then you need to crack down on it. Like, if that what they're saying, if there's like one monopoly that's axiom, right? If it's like all in smart and that's like 80% of how we see humans as valuable, then therefore,
But there's also that
but what's the
example
threshold then? Like, I don't know. I'm really trying to
that that
give some
um
crutches here.
that example about how the school system is structured, like uh it's a product of just how education is. I don't see how you could have an education system in the style of ours and not have these kinds of things happen, because like you're trying to teach a class of 30 kids, and if one of them just isn't getting it, then well, what are you supposed to do? You can't just not have them do the work, because then that'll create a dysfunctional relationship where the kids, the other kids are wondering why he doesn't have to do the work because he's too dumb to understand it, is the actual reason. And of course, you can't just say that. So that this kind of thing happens um, to avoid a terrible spaghetti of resentment and all kinds of. So like the solution to this would be to do away with the school system the way it's currently structured, but I don't think he would countenance that. Most people
Oh,
don't.
it's a shame, really. I mean, it really would solve a lot. It's freaking wild to me how many problems people complain about, particularly parents, that are entirely like caused by them sending their kids to school. Like
Yeah,
think about like what are a parent's like biggest concerns? Like, oh, I don't want my kid to get bullied. I want them to get good grades. I want like everything is school centric, and they just send their kid off into it and have no control over it. Like,
yeah, like IQ
and then
testing.
oh my god, and then the
uh,
bitching about all these new laws that the Don't Say Gay bill and all that shit, right? It's like you had to salute. Just don't send them there. If you think you have to manipulate them and control them into not doing all this shit. Anyway,
mm,
sorry.
IQ testing would save really low IQ kids from lots of problems. Well, it would stop them from getting into these kinds of tiffs with their teachers about not being able to do long division or so on, because you would know where their abilities were, the level they were at, and you just wouldn't send them to do things they can't do. You would send them immediately, maybe not even send them to school, just get them doing something they can actually do straight away. and that would cause all kinds of problems. But then maybe, yeah, you see, the thing about that is that this kind of person, this kind of leftist, I don't think they would be able to stomach something like that either, because that would be openly saying that children have different levels of intelligence and that it just isn't worth trying to educate certain types of children if they're sufficiently dumb. It's not worth trying to teach really dumb kids algebra.
Well, yeah, but
I
that's
don't
not
think they would
exactly the
like that.
argument. The argument is that it's not worth teaching someone in a way that's ineffective,
Yeah,
right? Like, like that's the argument. The argument isn't they're not worth teaching. The argument is like we're not gonna teach them in an ineffective way just to maintain a hierarchy, right?
yeah,
Because that's the thing. If you say no hierarchy, what they really mean is one hierarchy. We all have to stay.
right.
I think that should really be how they're forced to depict it. Like, okay, why should it be a monopolistic single hierarchy?
Yeah, I think we've exhausted. Well, I've done like 90% of the talking. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. You're the one who brought the article to me. But yeah, this one's like part of me wants to lean into the argument just to say that communism appeals to stupid people.
Mm. I mean, it clearly appeals to a certain type of person,
Yeah, no,
which is probably
that's a nicer way of putting it. Well,
probably
we
always.
wouldn't want to imply any value. That's the real issue. Is it's not that society values smart people. It's that we don't value communists. And there's just a correlation there, which is a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah. So I think we're basically of a mind of this, that this is just deeply evil, like all leftism.
Yeah. There was one other paragraph I thought was worth highlighting a little bit, just one last bit of it, just to make sure we represented enough of it. But like literally any bit of it that we pulled out of here, clearly, the stream's got to be funny to someone who's going to think, oh, they're being totally unfair. It can't be as bad as they say it is, and then they're going to look at it and be like, oh, yep. I just wanted to read the one about intelligence being a blessing and a curse. I thought that why can't I find it? I'm like, oh, I was missing the formula. That started with intelligence. Okay. Because this might shed some light on it, right? It's all about intelligence. But this is not the writer of the book. This is, I guess, the person writing the article. Let's see. For me, intelligence is a
Right.
curse as well as a blessing. I hate that. It should be a blessing as well as a curse. You don't say it that way.
Yeah.
You say it anyway. And it has as much salience to my own sense of moral worth as my blood type. Okay. In many ways, I revere those with less of it, whose different skills, practical, human, imaginative, make the world every day a tangibly better place for others, where mine do not. Being smart doesn't make you happy. It can inhibit your sociability. It can cut you off from others. It can generate a lifetime of insecurity. It's correlated with mood disorders and anxiety, and yet the system we live in was almost designed for someone like me. No one in my family had been to college before me. At the age of 10, I was given a simple IQ test to see whether I'd qualify for a place in a selective school, and my life was changed forever. So actually, this does shine kind of a dimension on it, right? They are literally saying they want IQ dysgenics. They want a little bit of it because they think that we went too far and people are starting to get too smart. And look at all these bad things that are going to happen the smarter you get. I mean,
Yeah, I
you're gonna create
obviously.
you're gonna push the bell curve further then, right? And have people even dumber, right? All things applying that way, right? If it's assuming it's just a shift, right? Maybe
Do
there's a
we
reason it's not.
do we really need to explain why intelligence is important to have a functioning society? I'm just not going to explain that. I'm just straight up just not going to do it because that's an
But
insult to my
I'm
intelligence.
I'm sorry, but everything practical, human, and imaginative, those are correlated with the less intelligent people. Because the person who wrote this is very intelligent and none of those things.
Are related to intelligence when they are, quite obviously.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think this is a wild little
Also,
paragraph to end it on.
this is just wrong. This stuff about mental disorders, like this is all wrong. Dumb people are more likely to the relationship between IQ and every kind of mental disorder is negative. So the more intelligent you get, the less likely you are to have basically any disorder.
Well, there are
So
like extreme outliers though and things like that, right? But yeah, the general thing is that you'd rather be on that end than the other.
well, yeah, like people talk about these autistic savants and stuff but the thing you've got to remember about that though is they are sort of there's always a media circus made about those precisely because they're unusual and weird and disordered in some ways. That's not the that's not an accurate picture of what most highly intelligent people are like.
Yeah, they're just so statistically not representative that it's
Yeah.
right.
So this is just factually inaccurate, the stuff he's saying about intelligence being correlated with mood disorders. It's just, yeah.
But what if society was dumb enough to actually believe that, and then they were happy about being dumb, and then they were happier overall, and we all had one hierarchy?
Mm, something like that. I don't know.
Well, that
Yeah.
was a fascinating little rabbit hole.
You probably didn't care so much about it. I don't want to sit and like go through the whole
No.
thing, but do you want to address the voice thing?
Oh yeah, the voice. No, I did actually listen through it. I listened. Well, I had to pause it and unpause it. But I don't know. I mean, it was a mixed bag, right?
Right.
Um,
Was there
it
anything I complained about that you thought I was being unfair about?
well,
Because the thing that happened in the first 5 minutes was really the most egregious thing. They spent like 5 minutes pontificating about how, th- like, I'm not saying this. This is what's so annoying when people say, oh, you're a misogynist. They spent 5 minutes just constantly going on about how women can't emotionally relate to men unless they go on hormones and try to live as men, and that's the only way they can do it, apparently. And then, like, 30 seconds later, she starts talking about how women have more empathy than men.
right. No, yeah, and I think part of it is that whenever I hear those, I mean, they're just thought terminating cliches. Basically, a lot of the entire like female half of the traditional argument, it's like it's just it's endless thought terminating cliches all the way down where they say the complementarianism package. Like if you really asked them to try to they tried to make the case right by saying that there's a distinction between protection and nurture. Actually, you know what? No they didn't. That was a commentator that I was reading while they were talking tried to make that argument. That was an interesting one as they said, you know, protecting is different from nurturing, right? And that women have a particular interest and predisposition to nurturing. That's right. The comment was it was like a total rad fem comment in the section there, but no, I mean, and then they got really derailed by like anime porn a lot, right? And then I think back to the interview and like the whole thing was about empathy or whatever. So then my empathy check is okay, how many men's issues did they mention in the interview? And I think it was one. It was like boys in education. Um, and I don't think there was much else. I remember repeatedly anytime they would talk about testosterone, um, leading to any kind of aggression, that they would immediately preface it with, "This isn't to excuse any behavior. This isn't to excuse any behavior," right? Which to me
Mm.
always feels like so unnecessary, and that platitude always like really rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, it's a
They're
virtue
very,
signal. It's a virtue signal. It's
oh
like
yeah, it's a little protection, right?
Brian always rages against this, like when someone gets, a 12-year-old, say, gets gang raped by a bunch of people in broad daylight or something like that. And there are always people who have this, like, absolute compulsion for some reason to say, I think it was appalling and disgusting, like as if that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. You're laughing,
Yeah,
but like,
right.
yeah, you know what I mean?
It is, and like it's so many people do that too.
Everyone, normies, that they can't not do it.
I honestly think sometimes I'll hear a story like that and I'll just be literally speechless. You know how you say like I'm speechless, right? But like literally I'm just like I don't know what to say, right? Not
Like
like that's bad.
that, I mean, that oversight about the differences between men's and women's theory of mind, in
Oh,
like, I literally did the open mouth soy face in public and just looked like a total ass because I was so just dumbfounded by that.
it was pretty amusing when they're talking about spatial reasoning and that you literally turn objects and that you can measure how fast it is and yeah.
And then they start just like, it's the superficiality of all of it, the just the unwillingness to look for any kind of deeper reason or causation, like when they're pontificating about how boys police gendered behavior in boys, and there's like no effort to kind of basically what they're saying is that
I
tomboys
don't recall.
are
Do you
valued.
recall roughly when in the because it was a fairly long interview. It
I
was a
can't
how
I
long was it?
can't
Like 2 hours?
I can't remember, but I'm not straw manning, so I remember
Okay.
basically what they said. They say that girls who are gender non-conforming are valued, and boys who are gender non-conforming are not, and that boys police that quite intensely. Um,
Oh yeah.
I think, and this is very politically incorrect, but like I think there are solutions, to this theoretically. The reason this happens is because boys, well, it's not conscious, obviously, it's all subconscious, but the ultimate reason, like the primordial reason for it, is that they see gender non-conforming behavior in males as a kind of abdication of responsibility. And it is,
Right.
because this is why, right? So when it comes to men have these things that are expected of them. And the thing that typifies men's expectations, men's virtues, um, and what sort of makes them what they are, what makes them characteristically male virtues, is there are two things. One is that it's something men actually have a claim to having a superior ability over that women don't have. Like, for instance, physical strength. That's, like, I think that's relatively uncontroversial, biologically based. And then the second thing is that um, the that they're punished when they display the other side of the coin of these traits, when they display weakness or cowardice or etc. So they're negatively incentivized. And these expectations are present just because they're male. Now, if you try to look at a gender flipped version of this, so you just have to ask, okay, what are women um, what is it that women uniquely can do in a way that men can't, that they're punished for not doing or straying from, and they're expected to do this just because they're female? Like, does that all make sense? And there really isn't anything. This is what I've been. We've had this conversation about the loss or the dearth of female virtue. The
Well,
one thing,
the only argument would be yeah, childbirth.
yeah,
That would be
the
the only. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
The only thing that ticks all those boxes is basically chastity, or as you put it to me, and I thought this was a great, a line, a great turn of phrases. Have sex in marriage, don't have sex out of marriage. That's literally it. Like, that was the thing historically that checked all those boxes. So, and now we don't even have that. So there's like nothing. And that's why when males exhibit gender non-conforming behavior, that there's a legitimate argument for saying that that is a kind of abdication of a responsibility. And it's why when you see all these conservatives pontificating about how women in superhero movies just act like men, right? I think what's going on there is there's a sort of crying.
But was she hot and did she cry a lot?
Well, no, I'll get to that. So I think what's going on is that they're crying out for there to be some kind of complementary set of virtues that are distinctly female in the same way that men's virtues are distinctly female. But they're just, well, like I said, there just isn't any in our society, is there? So they just end up taking on male behaviors.
No, yeah, and that's why I mean we've talked about it before too, the idea of like how could you create like a female virtue sort of like gender role, right?
Well, yeah,
To
that's
be
interesting. So
reciprocal.
I wanna say
Yeah.
something
And
about that as
I
well.
have an idea for one, and it would be kind of
Well,
like
can
if
I
you did
say
a
mine first?
okay,
It's kind
okay,
of
you can say yours first. Fine. Okay, fine. You can say yours
sorry. It's just like I've been thinking about these things for a while. I just need to get it out. So like so all the three boxes that it needs to check for it to actually truly be an equal concept of virtue and of gendered virtue and responsibility, for it to really be of a kind with the male virtues, is it has to be something that's expected of them just because they're female, and something that women are distinctly good at that men can't be, and something that they're punished for not doing or for straying from. Now, the thing about the things that women have a unique sort of claim to that men can't claim, because the male flip side of that would be something like physical strength. Again, just an uncontroversial one. It would be very difficult to create a female equivalent to that. And this has been test cased, if that's a phrase, in fiction. So Brandon Sanderson writes fantasy novels, and he writes fantasy novels where the cultures have distinct sets of gender roles and ideas and such. It looks as though what you might have to end up doing, if you wanted to sort of create the illusion of something that women have a distinct claim to that men can't claim, is you might end up having to just hamper or try to disable men's capacities in some way. So to create the reciprocal set of feminine virtues. So an example of this would be in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive novels. There's a really weird thing where reading and sort of being an intellectual in the main culture that's focused on in those novels is considered feminine. That the men don't read, they never learn how to read, they just have female servants read to them, and then that then becomes like a feminine ideal. And I don't think he was doing this consciously, but I think that's an unconscious acknowledgement that this might be the kind of thing you actually may have to do if you want to create a truly equal set of female virtues that ticks the three boxes I mentioned that male virtues tick. You might end up just mandating that men can't do certain things so that only women can do them, like reading in that case.
Right. I mean, obviously that can't work.
No. Well, what do you mean, obviously?
I mean, well, just that there's no way to implement that. There's no way to just like you just like stop men from reading. Like,
Yeah. Well, no, I
uh,
didn't mean I
well, but
didn't mean
not
that
that
specific
literally,
example.
but I
But
do mean, I mean, if you tried to segregate off certain things in that way, you, I don't. I mean, I guess
right,
you might create a black market for. I mean, I
but
had a question though about the first point though. You said it has to be like by virtue of them being male or female, right, for the gender role. Are when you say that, do you mean that it shouldn't be even a culturally enforced thing, right? Because if you take that in a really hard way, right?
well, no. What this is
It's like what
all
we
I mean
have is
by
like
it.
it's not
All
cultural, right?
all I mean by it is that men are expected to be strong because they're men. Like that's
Okay,
the
so
reason
you mean
for it.
it,
End of
yeah.
story. Yeah.
Okay, so you don't mean it
Yeah.
in like a really strict sense that way, because but in the stricter sense, that's obviously a gendered role that's gonna work and like be pervasive, right? One that's like intrinsic, like automatic, like the male gender role is. It's really not culturally enforced at all, I don't think. And that's actually that's a good question. I wonder to what degree are any gender roles even cultural?
Um.
I
Techno.
want to put it at a real low percent because
Mm. Well, sorry, elaborate on that.
Like the gender roles were just like so natural that culture doesn't deserve any credit. And then the question is, if we're going to try to create a female gender role, right, hypothetically, well, you'd have to do it culturally, right? Because we didn't have one that evolved naturally. Okay, so it has to be
Well,
some kind
I
of a
wouldn't
cultural thing,
um,
some kind of a propaganda campaign.
I wouldn't say culture. I would say technology can contribute to the level of emphasis on certain things over others. Like with strength, for instance, in modern civilization, for obvious reasons, there's less of an emphasis on physical strength and more of an emphasis on mental strength, resilience. Um,
Hmm.
so I agree with that. I agree that technology can make a difference to which of the male virtues, for instance, just to take that as an example, are emphasized and focused upon. But you can't just decide, oh well, we're just not going to value strength now. We're going to value weak, cowardly, whatever men over men who are strong, competent, courageous, etc. It literally cannot happen. And I think that's all. That's basically what you're saying, right?
Well, yeah, to some extent. So I think that is a good distinction. Yeah. So propaganda campaigns are obviously like that'd be like a weak form of trying to enforce something like that. And it seems as though it's like the values are more or less static, and then like the relative importance of them is just going to bend based on factors that are a lot less like flippant than just like I don't know, like a cultural fad, you know?
Yeah.
So
And just
so
to
okay,
be,
so are you
yeah.
saying, but how are we going to technologically create like female ability ghettos for them? Well, we did that. We did that with women's sports, right?
Well, I mean, just to this is
Is
a
it just
separate.
women's sports all the way down?
I think this is a separate point from what you're saying, which is that I don't want the most masculine possible society because I don't want Sparta. I think that's impossible in a modern civilization. And I am an advocate for modern civilization. I want to preserve it. There needs to be a good balance of the masculine virtues and the feminine virtues. And the fact that we aren't living in the most masculine possible society, like, say, Sparta, is just part of the trade off of progress, of things that I would be happy to call a kind of social progress, like the fact that half the kids in the Western world don't die of tuberculosis and diphtheria anymore before the age of 1. So just to be clear, I just don't want people to think that I'm some cliche manosphere talking head who, wants us to form manor buns and go across the steppes pillaging and conquering and stuff and whatever like that. That's kind of silly. But yeah, what was your real question? Because that had nothing to do with your question.
Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to focus on the project of if there's so it was back from the schoolyard bullying example, right? And we're saying, okay, there's a logical, not necessarily justified, right? But there's this argument, right? There's a perception of admonishing male virtues when they're not done, and like there's just no reciprocal skeleton of that exists on the female side of things, really. So
Well, there could be. I'm
there
saying that
could be, right?
there
There could
could
be, but
be.
the question is like,
What you're asking,
okay,
what would it take,
yeah,
basically?
right. Because I mean,
Well,
the most obvious thing to me would be like maybe it's just the right kind of media, and then there's a story that resonates with people. That's the most obvious idea to people, which would be the propaganda approach, right? And like that's what everybody thinks is the thing that's gonna happen. And everyone says Alien from or Ripley from Alien, Ripley from Alien, guys.
yeah, who had masculine virtues? It has
Yeah,
to be
right.
said.
I know. I love how it's the one example, and it's like a terrible example. It's funny.
Yeah.
Um,
Apart from, and this speaks to our point before, just being a
oh, I
mother,
did have an actual idea
motherhood,
though.
right? Yeah. Yes,
No,
go on.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh no,
I
no.
just remember I had a better idea than the propaganda idea.
Well, no, like so what you would need to do is you would need to encourage women, only women, which doesn't mean banning men from doing it, but you would need to encourage just women to do certain things and then actually be willing to um punish them and shame them, and that's very controversial now, for not doing it in the same way, well, just the same as we expect of men. So the rubric, or the blueprint, is just treating women the way we treat men, basically, but with respect to a different set of qualities, of attributes, because of course men and women aren't the same. So
So women's sports all the way down, kind of.
I don't really understand what you mean by that. Can you?
Well, like women's sports, it's kind of like you say, okay, you can do anything you want, just like a man. But then also we have women's sports, and you can do that. And we have like a separate standard for you. But it could be a little bit synthesized, right? But I mean, just like in the military, right? They have a separate standard, right? Etc. You could that could be in the workplaces. They just like, oh, okay, yeah, she's 5 minutes late all the time because uh, she had a baby or something, whatever.
I think that's too like I think that's too specific a case to be called a virtue. For instance, I wouldn't call being good at basketball a virtue. Um,
Mm,
I would call maybe physical endurance a virtue, something like that, because that can be applied to anything essentially, whereas basketball is a very particular skill set. So it would be things like, Janice Fiamengo has talked about the the sort of traditional set of feminine virtues that you find explicated in, I don't know, Jane Austen novels, for instance. That's her favorite author, because Jane Austen dealt with heroines. She was very interested in the concept of female virtues. Um, they talk about things like compassion and modesty and loving kindness and self-control, etc. But then the problem with that is that those aren't really equivalent to male virtues in the way that I mentioned, because women don't have a unique claim to them. And what's the other problem? Well, we're certainly
they're not
not
very
gonna.
active. A lot of those aren't very active either.
No, and we
Like, how do
certainly
you
don't.
prove how modest you are? Oh, I guess
Yeah,
it's a burqa. I guess that's
well,
like
yeah, but we don't punish them for not exhibiting these qualities. That's the other issue. So that it's
right.
like it's still not equivalent in any meaningful way.
I mean, well, the other one too is that people say that women are like a supposed to be like moral gatekeepers or like people who are able to kind of like influence society in ways that are helpful and beneficent or whatever, right? Um Maybe there could be something there, right? Because, for example, of an expectation that we do have of women just because they're women, is that women are wonderful and they're less likely to lie and they're more childlike and they're more innocent, right? So we could first acknowledge that we have that prejudice, right? So basically, we acknowledge gynocentrism, step one, right? From there, we say, well, since you live in a gynocentric world where you're viewed this way, you are someone who needs to take that responsibility seriously. That when you lie about a crime or when you testify to a thing that happens, right? We'll keep it neutral. That your testimony will get taken more seriously because you're a woman, right? And that like that your achievements are going to be perceived as more impressive because you're a woman, right? Like, et cetera, right? You straight up say
Yeah,
like acknowledge your
well,
female privilege and then act like you have that privilege in a
yeah,
responsible
exactly.
way.
I
And then
had
and
this
from
idea.
there, what if that's the way to build it? The problem is there's no way to get people to do that
Well,
without a propaganda campaign, which won't work.
I agree with that.
So,
Like, I had this idea. We had this conversation a while back. I had this idea that if you wanted to build a set of feminine virtues that truly was equivalent to the male set in the important ways, right? In the three ways I listed. What you could do is you could just look at the areas where women have cultural power that men don't, and then you should sort of build it based on that. So, like
right.
for instance, I think I said honesty the last time I spoke to you should be one. And that would be confusing to some people because they might think I'm saying, well, I'm not saying this is the point that men should be dishonest or that honesty isn't important for men too. But the reason it should be a feminine virtue, and the reason it should be particularly expected or associated with women is because when women are dishonest, the consequences for men in society are a lot worse a lot of times because one, women are more likely to be believed, so people are just more willing to believe women's lies. And then second, the consequences of women's lives are a lot worse because men are willing to kill other men for perceived slights against a woman in a way that they wouldn't if it was a man who was slighted. So they could, if you expected honesty of women as a feminine virtue, then we might be able to make some progress towards limiting the size of the pile of dead male bodies based on white knighting, etc. But as you say, it's never going to happen. So,
I don't know. I'm just, it's really dawning on me how funny this concept is, where we say to women, all right, we figured it out. The first female virtue is honesty. And then all the women are like, yeah, hell yeah, I love this. This is great. Tell me more about how the best first female virtue is honesty. It's like, well, because when you guys lie, it's a lot more damning and you're not taking it seriously. And
yeah,
oh, how many more can we do this with? Nurturing. Oh, nurturing, right? Because like dead babies. That one was easy.
yeah.
Bam, we could do
But,
this all day. What's another one? Chastity? Do we try chastity? Oh,
well, no,
chastity
this
because
is
false
right.
fraternity. That's kind of
This is
honesty, though.
this is
That
the
doesn't really. That's
this
redundant.
this is the one that well, this is the thing, right?
Here's the
W-
showstopper. All
We
right.
we can't go
Drum
about
roll.
crafting something completely novel, right? A completely novel set of virtues that are equivalent to men's if we can't even enforce the one thing that was arguably enforced equally and had all of the equivalent properties of men's virtues in past societies. And I think I said that the one thing for which that is arguably true is chastity, or as you put it, have sex in marriage and don't have sex out of marriage. And the problem is that we're in a situation where we can't even enforce that. Like, we can't even get women to take that seriously. So I think we need to do that before we can even think about coming up with novel stuff. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. Because
Yeah, but I guess I
if
feel
we
like
can't
what
even do
since
that, you know what I mean?
so are you saying that chastity would be the one to try to bring back because it has proof of concept?
Yes,
Was that your
basically.
I don't see, I would wa but I
I'm
wonder if it
saying that
go
if
I
we
think it goes the
can't,
other way. I think it goes the
yeah,
other way, right? Because I think instead the fact that they're gonna look to it in the past, right? It's now it's like it's dead now, right? It's like trying to revive anything that's they're gonna they'll cry Handmaid's Tale won't work. It has to be something totally new. It has to be the opposite. It has to be like beauty, right? It has to be like a like we have to take hair and makeup culture and e-thoughterry and then just try to like turn it just 15 degrees.
yeah.
So instead of going straight into the sun, it can have an orbit and then maybe build from there. I think maybe that's the approach.
Um, so like, hmm,
Body positivity. Like
this is
these are
the
things women are really passionate about.
well, the thing about beauty, I guess we were talking about this before. I do like beautiful people. Obviously, everybody does. And I guess you could make a really weak sort of utilitarian argument about it improving society when there are lots of beautiful people because of just, I don't know, the dopamine kick that you get when you see someone who's really pretty. But it's a very weak appeal. Not saying there's nothing to it. It's just, well, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, you say a society that that's why vampires are always put that way, right? Because since they're immortal, they have nothing fucking better to do, so they're just covered in like lavish, gaudy, beautiful things and obsessed with that, right? And it's always depicted as this like very, very superficial and vain and shallow sort of a way of viewing the world. But everybody sees the appeal, right? And that's why it's so funny. I don't know.
I think
And it's a fun juxtaposition too, because you're immortal and like that's what your ambition is.
it's better than the way we view beauty in the modern West. It's like I understand that women have this desire to be beautiful, but the thing is with modesty standards, right, is that that's so that they got into this in Boyce's talk where they talked about basically low impulse control men not being able to control their sexual urges, right? low impulse control men, obviously not all of them, and they were talking about how we could change this or do something about it. Um, and obviously, I place a very low credence in the ability of education programs or propaganda campaigns, because even if you were being constantly propagandized to have higher impulse control, I don't think it would actually work. At best, it would be a very superficial effect. You would just be sort of putting on the airs of being less impulsive in public to basically virtue signal. So the way that this was dealt with in traditional societies, and still is in some traditional societies, is that men just wouldn't be exposed. Low impulse control men wouldn't be exposed to sexual stimuli, images that were sexually stimulating to them, because of modesty standards, because women were encouraged to basically not show off their bodies, right? And that's a way that you could deal with it that would be imposing a responsibility on women to do something, but that's also anathema in our society. So it's not going to happen. And it's really irritating in a way that speaks to your point, because for all this talk about individualism, right, and being so like when feminists decry modesty standards in other cultures, they'll talk about the lack of individuality, which I guess that makes sense if everybody's going about in identikit, cloth bags that are all black or something and all look exactly the same. But then it's debatable whether or not the alternative to this, which is everybody running around half naked, or let's just say naked, like a nudist community, what's individualistic about that? Like, I don't see it, because obviously everybody has a naked body, so it doesn't make any sense. And if you want to be beautiful, then you were talking about like ornate clothing and beautiful dresses and jewelry, and like putting like ridiculous hairstyles and the kinds of things that went on in the Regency period in Britain, among the aristocracy and other
Well,
societies.
yeah, because that's
Like,
the thing. If you like makeup's a good example, right? Because
mm,
you'll look at like a makeup culture, right, and tutorials and stuff, and like what they're doing often is some kind of like really fun theatrical, big extravagant thing. But like the real makeup culture is people doing an everyday look, and in terms of that, it kind of seems like there's a phenomenon of people sort of like they're all kind of caking up into a point where they all look like the same person, you know?
mm. But yeah,
They
but
all look like Barbie at a point, and it's like the same face.
do you understand the thing that I'm getting at? That like a modest culture, not a culture where everybody's in an identical cloth bag, but just a culture with a modesty standard, could be more individualized than a culture where everybody's running around naked, because everybody could have radically different clothing and a radically different sense of personal style whilst adhering to the standard. And it would also be doing something socially responsible by I don't know, not inciting the passions of low impulse control men, as I basically just argued.
Well, yeah, I think that that hangs together. I wonder if, I mean, it'd have to be kind of a soft standard, right? Which I think naturally it is, right? And because of
You
that, you
mean,
get more of the broad spectrum, but then you need
yeah.
like the nexus of the standard to fall like in that perfect middle. Because I think, yeah, I think you're not wrong to say, because that's what I was trying to say is that on the other spectrum of it, right, are all the naked people, all the highly promiscuous people, kind of putting makeup in that same category, but it's different, right? There's a sense of like people go to a point when they're so obsessed with showing off and everything like that. And then you have the opposite end of it where if everybody has to wear the same cloth bag, then obviously that's also not individualistic either. So I don't know, because you could imagine a modesty standard though that's like very constricted and not very individualistic. You could also imagine like everybody has to wear a cloth bag, but everybody gets to make their own individual cloth bag and they're all unique and blah blah, right? So because you could actually create a diversity of stuff. I guess what I'm saying is that technically individual expression might just be like a red herring. Like regardless of how modest our society is, the level of uh, uh, self-expression in our tools, it seems pretty good. I guess
Well, I
unless
mean,
you're in a burqa, that's about it.
this started off this conversation when you were saying that we should try to extract a sense of feminine virtue or value from e-thoughts, basically, which is
Yeah, I know.
probably a
Sorry, I took
forlorn
us down a yeah, I took us
um
down a dark, pointless road.
yeah, probably a forlorn effort. Yeah. Hmm.
Uh,
Jay Willie's comments. Yeah, I don't disagree.
do we want to watch that? I do remember though that voice interview does have a lot of funny twists and turns to it.
Oh, well, there was also a really annoying part where one of them started talking about how they went on testosterone and they started objectifying women's bodies and not seeing their personhood. Was
Man, am I like
basically,
a Benjamin Boys hate channel now? But I don't hate him. I like him, right? So it's just
yes.
fun. I get like a little annoying gnat that likes to.
Well, I never mentioned him. I was talking about his guest. But
Well,
yeah.
yeah, but it's whatever. Sorry, how do I oh, how do I share? Click share. I always get confused because when it says share screen, I don't think it's going to be allowing me to choose a tab. But yeah, um,
Oh God.
I thought she was very cute though. Her face is very cute,
Yeah.
and she's so much cuter on her picture than or on her like live video than on this picture. She looks like way different here.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I should have remembered to turn off my camera at a point in the stream because then it has like a visual change and then it's easier to find things. Anyway, shoulda, woulda, coulda. You said it was in the first 5 minutes?
No, that was something else. I can't remember where the other bits are. Sorry. Like, you're not really
No,
gonna
the
troll through the whole 2 hours, like trying to.
no, we're not.
Hmm.
I guess there's yeah, I guess there's no point. I played it pretty bad. They were pretty. They actually were fine at 1.75.
Yeah. It's just dull though, because there's a lot of just pontificate pontificating about things and not offering any real solutions. Like, ooh, what do we do about low impulse control men? Oh, we need to integrate these desires into society and make them more functional. Like, oh, how exactly? What are you talking about? Like a modesty standard? Oh, no, because that would be expecting something of women, and we can't do
Yeah,
that.
well,
So,
and that's the thing is like that counter argument comes out immediately. It's in everyone's head the moment, right? And like like everything's victim blaming, right? Everything's victim blaming all the way down. Um, so I wonder, does that really doesn't that nuke it? That nukes female virtue right at the beginning? There's like nothing we can do because if we try to make anything that has a standard, they're just gonna say that they'll literally just call it victim blaming. It won't even make sense.
the problem that
It's just
seems
non
to
sequitur.
the
Just throw it
problem
out there.
the problem that seems to come up constantly is just people's level of credence in the mutability of human behavior through, quote, education. And I think you and I share an intuition based on a cumulative case from all sorts of different sources of evidence that we shouldn't really put much faith in that, in the ability of, so-called education programs to change people's behavior. But this comes up a lot. Um, people, liberals, and leftists, non-leftist liberals, like I always want to ask them, what if they're just not going to do it? What if people just aren't going to do what you want them to do? So Richard Hanania, who is generally pretty intelligent, but he isn't intelligent when it comes to gender issues and feminism. And that's the general pattern with intelligent people. Almost everybody has like a blind spot in this area. He was talking about problems created by certain types of women in public life, like on university campuses, where a man can't just get in another man's face and scream at him for 10 minutes about how his feelings have been hurt and about how he's being victimized, because people find that disgusting, and at some point they're going to have to either shake hands or come to blows. Whereas women um, don't, um, men don't seem to know how to deal with women who act out in this way because the same rules don't apply. Jordan Peterson said this in his interview with Camille Paglia. He said men can't control crazy women, right, for obvious reasons. And
I think I do remember that. What year
um,
was that interview? Was that in 2017? Sorry, I didn't mean to derail. I was just like, I distinctly think I remember that. I'm gonna find it now.
yeah, and Hanania was saying that it's possible that we can have a way out where discourse is governed by a male standard, where basically some hurt feelings are basically the price of entry, and that if you're going to do that, if you're going to act out in these strange ways, then you just shouldn't be part of the discourse. So that we can basically we can get the discourse to conform to a male standard of behavior where you just don't do things like that. And the problem with doing things like that is that men aren't willing to enforce a standard on women the same as they would for other men, right? Like in Oxford University when they first started admitting women in the early 20th century or something. This was noticed there as well, that it interfered with the general cut and thrust of academic debate because men didn't really want to fight with women. And when you did fight with them, verbally, I mean, like take apart their arguments, you were seen as being a bad person. So um, he's saying, why can't we just expect women who come into this space to adhere to a male standard? And lots of people say this, right? And I always want to say, like, okay, but what if they're just not going to do it? Like another example of this would be Destiny. He was talking about the sort of ambiguities of deciding what rape is in modern society, where um, if you have sort of talking about teaching women resistance strategies so that they don't get sexually assaulted, just basically teaching women to say no and so on, and not having a double standard where if two people are inebriated, then the man's the rapist, basically. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you're familiar with all these cases, right?
Yep, gotta love that double rape paradox.
Right. Yeah. So it's exactly that, right? Exactly that kind of thing. And everybody's response to this is just, well, why can't we just get women to adhere to the male standard, right? Why can't we just expect of them what we expect of men in these kinds of situations? And Destiny's argued that this liberal YouTuber in discussions with other leftists, controversially. And again, it's the same thing. I'm like, well, okay, but what if they're just not going to do that? What if equality isn't really what they want? It's just what they're saying they want. And what if the reason we had traditionalist standards about not having sex until marriage and whatever and this kind of stuff was precisely to avoid this kind of thing because they understood that women just weren't going to be held to a male standard. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think we're basically in agreement about this. I don't know.
I wonder though, like, I mean, I feel like if one generation got duped into it, like they could have as well, and they might not have formulated or articulated that particular idea that women just would refuse to adhere to a male standard. But they kind of knew it implicitly. I don't know. It's really hazy. I don't know, but it's an interesting way of putting it. Um, I mean, really, there's a solution to this, which actually I think this is part of Jay Willie's authoritarian, libertarian, an anarcho-fascist utopia thing, um, which is an idea that I like, right? Like if you force me to design a government at gunpoint, the first thing I do is I say, okay, well, let's have people register as either independence or dependence, right? And if you're an independent, you get to do things like own property and vote, etc., and like maybe drive a car. And then a dependent, you don't get to do most of those things, and you have an added advantage of not having to produce as much and being held to a lower standard and being taken care of. We'll find a job for you, etc. Kind of like you give people like a soft underbelly communism and certain privileges for giving up those rights, for basically explicitly stating I'm not going to be held to the male standard. But you open it up to everyone. The problem is you're going to get way too many people who opt for the dependent part, honestly. Like unless you deprive like a lot of rights, you really need to create that threshold such that like that it's attractive to be an independent. But then you wonder, does that kind of create a slave class, right, where people are pressured into becoming the independent, right?
I mean,
Which
if
is
you
kind of what's happened de
if you put
facto. But
it that starkly, I would guess it would be something like 90% of women and maybe 50% of men, something like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, no, exactly, exactly.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think that's about right. Which
Yeah,
what does that? Sorry, what does that come out to? I'm an idiot. That's like basically half the people,
yeah, basically.
55%. Yep. But I mean, that's honestly, we're working with a much, much worse ratio right now in America. Although I suppose this would be assuming that the independence, like that's representative of like people who produce like all the wealth and pay all the taxes, which isn't necessarily the case. Hmm, I don't know.
Yeah. How do you feel about because some liberals and centrists will deny this, will deny that there has been decline in our civilization with a capital D. It just astonishes me that anyone looking at the world, the way things are right now, can think that we're on some kind of upward trajectory in pretty much any way. Even if all you care about is technology, there hasn't been real progress, even in technology, for a long time. So, yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I guess for me, the biggest thing is hoping that eventually there's a strong enough historical case to usher in the abolition of government, right? That's the big thing, right? That's the big, do we get our second coming of Jesus moment? That's the libertarian second coming Jesus moment, right? And then that's always like a back burner thing, kind of hope for. Not a lot in particular that you can do to force that. But that's not really an answer to the question. That's just obviously I have that prejudice in the back of my mind. Um, but
Well,
in terms of the actual world, I don't know. I mean, we're sustaining more and more people, right?
for now.
Um, yeah, I mean, and I know that there's a big disappointment in that we're not seeing the levels of growth that I think people expect. I think that generally seems to be what people, complain about, right? But in general, like even these modest increases to technology, like to get a bigger TV that's cheaper. I mean, I know that sounds very ridiculous and superficial, but I mean, it really can't be understated that the typical person is kind of living like a king, like in terms of the conveniences of technology and all the stuff you have access to, all of the information and the entertainment that's just constant, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's getting easier and better and cheaper to have a comfortable and quite luxurious life, right? And I just think it's really easy to lose sight of that.
Well, if we want this to continue, well, there are all sorts of things we'll have to do, and I can get into this. We will need to do population control, right? Because historically, if you take the first Amerindians who set foot in the Americas, what probably happened is they arrived in a new place. There were all these resources and food and whatnot, literally just walking around. There was an area of massively abundant resources. So their population exploded until they'd basically consumed all of the easiest available resources and food, and that there weren't any big megafauna running around anymore. And they ran into the point of diminishing returns. And then their population overshot the carrying capacity because they'd basically depleted everything. And then the population was limited naturally by famine, starvation, and war, right? That's how nature naturally deals with an exploding population, is by basically killing babies.
Well, it's kind of
Now,
like boom and bust, really. Although
yeah,
I
it's
will note the American Indians were
it's
essentially communists. Sorry.
right.
Sorry, not sorry.
That the you understand the point I'm making, though, right? So,
I mean, I get, yeah, I get the point that there are
Malthusianism.
natural, yeah, there are natural constrictions to that, and that there's no reason that we can't see something like that with our
So
society, right?
in
It's not like the
modern
American Indians planned for that to happen.
in modern civilization, a lot of people mistakenly believe that we need to encourage reproduction, that it's too difficult to reproduce, and that we need to encourage people to reproduce more because of birth control and declining birth rates. But that is always and anywhere just a temporary thing, in the same way that historically peace was just kind of an interlude between wars, like war was the norm. Um, this is comparable to that in the sense that, um, well, just think of it in terms of selection pressure, evolutionary selection pressure. The birth control pill selects for people who don't use it because of allergies or religious reasons or whatever. So we are in a situation of ironically intense selection, for positive selection, for people with high fertility. So if we want to prevent a Malthusian catastrophe and a collapse, which we won't come back from for reasons which I could get into, but I don't think we're going to come back from it. In order to avoid an eventual population explosion and our society collapsing and the population just being limited in the natural way through competition over finite resources, famine, disease, war, we need to limit reproduction consciously. We need to have something like a reproduction license, where basically you're allowed to have children if you have the means to sustain them yourself. So we're not talking about micromanaging the genome or genetic engineering or anything like that. Just responsible people are allowed to reproduce, and intelligent people, productive people can reproduce, and people who aren't can't. And what this would have the effect of is that, say, if the economy, because the economy might go into a lull anyway, so production might go down, and therefore wages would go down. But then the population would come down also. So there wouldn't be any collapse scenario where the population overshoots the available resources. Because if we went into a depression, if the economy went into a decline for independent reasons, that would just mean that fewer people would be qualifying for the reproductive license, and then the population would be limited in that way. Whereas in the past, it would be limited by war, famine, disease. And that's what we need to do. And we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just really optimistic about like demand for food prevailing. I know that sounds really vapid. I know that sounds like excruciating, but like I'm part of the problem, aren't I? um,
Like I
yeah, well, because
see,
our wars aren't
yeah,
killing enough people, right? So definitely it's got to be. I don't know though. I mean, there's so much stuff we could be eating that we're just not. And I
yeah,
think when push comes to shove, and really it's food and it's water, right? Are kind of the things. Well,
right,
I know shelter is a big one, obviously. But like I'm just really optimistic that we're gonna reach a breaking point where they're just gonna come in hard with a movement that's like, here, like we found a way to deep fry bugs and it tastes delicious, and you're gonna eat it because it's delicious, and like I'll eat it and it's probably delicious and like better for you. They'll make like chips out of crickets, and they'll be like zero carb and high protein, and it'll be like in Hakuna Matata. So
right.
I'm
Well,
excited for that, and then I'm gonna have a pod home.
I don't disagree with that. Like, we could invent some fancy way of improving crop yields and stuff. Basically,
We already
just
have
in
stuff, right? Like we could like so
right.
many
But you
things.
you understand my point that that's not really a solution. That's only ever a temporary measure. It's just a um pushing the problem a little bit further back. Eventually, we will
Yeah,
just
but
have to limit our population.
wait a minute though, isn't it always like that? Because we're talking about life and death and mortality. It's always like temporal, right? No, the point you make about limiting reproduction to responsible people who are like signing off and verbally stating like we're supporting this person's existence, which is to say we're like ensuring them like if they end up being an absolute piece of shit and they can't produce anything or whatever the problem is, right? Like we incur the costs of them existing. That's not society's problem. Instead, people kind of like view children as like they produce their own worth, or like they pay for themselves up to the point where they then produce someone who then pays for themselves, right? Which is ridiculous, right? Like I see how that is a more temporary solution rather than having them upfront state, right, that the parent should be liable. So I think that makes a huge difference. I think that would solve so many problems. But you know what they'll say, you know what they call it.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't
What,
even have to say what
eugenics?
they
Or
call it. That
yeah.
you're gonna get me canceled. They're gonna know that my channel's spicy now.
Yeah.
Didn't
Like,
we have a stream that I just labeled like eugenics stream? Oh no, we called it progressive stream as a silly joke.
I
Um,
think um I think the difference between a civilization and what we have, I don't quite know what to call what we have, is that a civilization, what it does is a true civilization, which is to say not the state we're currently in, it deals with the problems of pre-modern ways of living, like for instance half the kids dying of tuberculosis and diphtheria and so on before the age of 1. It deals with that problem, but it also takes measures to address the additional problems that are created by modern life, like say superbugs, antibiotic resistant bugs, and well, dysgenics, and these kinds of things, and reproduction control. And the problem that we have in our society, if you want to call it that, as it stands today, is that we've solved all of the problems of pre-modernity, but we're not doing anything to address the problems of modernity. And that's only going to bite us in the arse in the end. That doesn't mean I want us to go back to the pre-modern world. It just means that we need to be, well, yes, you understand what I'm saying.
yeah,
So yeah,
like aware of the risks and aware of like the wisdom that came from them, right? It's just too far away, right? 50 years ago. It's more than 50 years ago, and
yeah.
therefore we don't know.
I actually, the distributist did an interesting exercise. This YouTuber, conservative YouTuber. I don't really
Yeah, I think
see.
I'm subscribed to him, but I'm not sure if I've seen have they posted recently?
Uh, I'm not sure. Yes, he is still posting regularly, I think.
I just
But
assume everybody else is dead like me.
a while ago, what he did was is he was arguing with some centrists, Adam and Sitch, I think it was, about decline, and they were just like, affecting bafflement at this idea of capital D decline. And
Oh,
the
yeah, I might have seen this one.
the distributist was trying to he actually made a response video, like an after action report kind of thing, where he listed various of the ways in which society is declining over the last, say, 100 years or so, or uh, basically within the last 100 years, the problems of civilization which we're not addressing. And so I haven't watched that video because I didn't want to just make a clone of his, or obviously there will be some overlap. I thought I would make my own list of points of decline, things that are declining, and that we need to address as a civilization. So I'm just going to send that to you. Hold on, in Discord. And I was wondering if we could open it and have a look. Hang on.
Yeah. I have to, let's see, I have to be at work in 40 minutes, but I
Oh,
work from
that's,
home.
yeah,
So,
that's
well, I mean,
cool.
obviously, I'm not going to be here for 40 minutes because I have to like log off
Yeah,
the thing and like read blah 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 blah. But yeah, like 30 minutes, easy.
sure.
Okay. Um, super chat. When was this? Their conversation with Distributus. Do you remember like roughly how long ago it was?
With Adam and Sitch.
Yeah.
Uh,
I wonder if I saw that one. I don't think I did.
Distributist.
Maybe I just have to
Uh,
search under their channel for him. Is that how? I never trust searches. This.
Okie doke, I've found it. Yeah, this was it.
Oh, is it this one from 5 months ago?
The title is Can Centrist Liberal Abs Save Civilization? Feat the Distributist.
Yeah, I found it.
Oh,
We doubled our
like,
work.
yeah. Although the centrist liberal abs thing is like a distraction, that's not really what they talked about. Once Dave got there, he just they talked about decline. So yeah, can you have a look at my points of decline?
Yes, one moment. This. I can't. Distributist is not a word I can spell at all. Distributist. I did it. What did I? Oh, it's because it's not a real word. Okay, I spelled it right.
No, it is a real word.
Well, not according to my spell check.
Oh,
Did I get it right? Distributist. I did it. Distributist. Yes, I did it right. Okay. I don't. It's just like it looks wrong.
yeah, it's a funny word. Just
Okay. And then okay, so we got the list. Here we
there's no problem with the file type, is there? Like you can read it fine.
go. They want me to try out. I'm going to sign up a thing. Ah, crap. Let me just get rid of this. I don't think I need to. Yeah, view only. That works fine.
Yep. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I just wonder what a leftist would have to say about this, because they obviously couldn't deny that any of this is even happening, because it would just be insane, because the
It's
evidence is so overwhelming.
well, these things are all points of decline. This is wrong. I have a non-editable copy. This is points of what the Republicans have done through their corporations. And that's how they would describe it. Because that's their threat
Oh,
narrative.
right. Yeah,
That's their threat
because
narrative. No,
so
I'm
they
serious.
would.
That's how they think. They will put it into that
No, yeah,
thing.
that's like I was gonna say that. So, like, their response to this would be that this is because of these problems are all just caused by, I don't know, right-wing social policies, and they have no kind of that it's not some kind of deep problem with our
Well,
society.
yeah, but you can 6 degrees of separation it though. No. They'll acknowledge all these horrible things are happening, and they're happening 10 times worse than how you think they're happening, and the reason is Republicans and corporations.
Right. Yeah.
And you can 6 degrees of separation it, right, to see how they're partly responsible, right? And that's all you really need. All you need is like the skeleton of an argument, and then once it comes down to like the actual impact and degree to create like a realistic set of dimensions, right? Now I think that's where everybody just kind of goes, goes a little bit Picasso, and I think everyone kind of is that way to a degree, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think theirs is a little anyway. But that's me being silly. But yeah, we have points of decline, rates of suicide. Is the suicide rate going up overall, actually?
So the general picture is quite complicated. So like the
I thought suicide
analogy
rates were slightly going down.
So
I
the
might be mistaken
analogy
though.
the analogy I like to make is to a drug is that if you had a whole bunch of drug trials on a drug in all sorts of different countries, and you saw that in some people it was making them a bit better, in some people it was making them worse, in others it just wasn't really doing anything, that definitely wouldn't be an endorsement, right, of that drug. And such is the case with suicide rates. Like if you look at many different countries over the last 100 years, like data from all the different countries that where data is being collected, um, there's no consistent trend. Sometimes in some it's going up, some it's going down. In a lot, it's kind of staying the same. But what's interesting is that if you look into um, broken down by age, it's even more interesting. So, in most countries, suicide rates have increased for young people. And by young, I basically just mean not old. Let's just say the under 40s. Middle aged people, it stayed kind of the same. And in old people, it's decreased. So, for young and middle aged people, suicide has been getting worse pretty consistently.
Okay, and
And that's
that's
bad,
and
obviously.
yeah, and well, I mean, couldn't you could really just say rates of suicide in the young and parse it out. I mean, I know that
Sure,
it's a
yeah.
little bit it's a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? Is it cynical to like just imply that it matters less if an older person commits suicide? I mean,
Well,
it's
I
like the
wouldn't.
same reason that it's more tragic if a child dies, right? It's like they didn't get to live their life, right? And like everybody, it's one
Well,
of those things that everybody thinks,
and
you know what I
also,
mean?
and also, they're the next generation, the people who are supposed to be like building society and making it
Yeah,
better.
when
So,
that gets truncated, it's like they exactly they could have been part of the next generation or whatever. So it also cuts off like all of that earlier too, right?
yeah.
It's not to okay, so
And the thing
yeah,
is
but
that
I think rates of
they
suicide in the young is the way to
yeah,
put it then.
and
But yeah,
they could make a kind of deflationist case and say that, oh, it's really not that bad. So, for instance, but I think that's crazy because Britain has the longest range data set, like the one that goes the furthest back in time to 1863. And among the under 35s, the suicide rate is basically the same in Britain in the late 2010s as it was in 1863. And if you consider all of the change that's happened in Britain since then, that's kind of crazy. Because I think if you went to a person in 1863, Sean last talked about this, and you talked about how in the future there was going to be this amazing process whereby we found ways to eliminate pretty much all of the major causes of death at that time, eliminated absolute poverty through welfare programs, and there was this amazing process that happened in all sorts of different societies at once, and yet there was no change whatsoever in the rate at which young people, anyway, were being so damaged by their society that it led them to kill themselves. That's kind of crazy. I think they would
yeah.
acknowledge that something's gone very badly wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is a one move checkmate, honestly. Because the thing is what better, more pure measure of how good a society is than the rate at which people decide, nope, I'd rather check out. Right, and I get that it's not perfect. There's a crudeness to that, but at the same time, like, is that not like if we had to choose one measure, like the rate at which people decide to kill themselves, right? I guess it really hinges on their mental health, right? Or
Yeah.
like to what degree? I guess that's the real part of it where the argument gets shaky, like
Well, I
because
think we have,
we tend to argue anybody in their right mind doesn't want to, right?
yeah,
Which is but I mean even that's a little simplistic. But anyway,
we must have similar intuitions about this. In my opinion, obviously it's not perfect, but in my opinion, suicide rates are a much better litmus test for the overall welfare or well-being of a society than just asking people if they're happy, for instance. Because if,
right,
yeah, because
yeah.
obviously if you just ask people if they're happy, that's going to be subject to all sorts of funny issues.
Even asking people if they're suicidal feels like a better measure than asking if they're happy. But of course, rates of actual committed suicide are far better than both.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I would agree with that.
What does rates of friendliness mean? Oh, friendlessness. I thought this said friendliness, and I was like, that's tenuous. Friendlessness. Okay.
So basically, over the last several decades, and there's all sorts of data that corroborates this, the uh, fraction of people just reporting, self-reporting, that they either have no friends or no best friend has massively increased, like massively 3 or 4-fold since I think like the 80s. So yeah, that's pretty damning also, I think.
Does that include though? I hope it doesn't conflate people who say they have no best friend or no friend, because I don't know. Like I've always had enough friends that it always made me uncomfortable when people are like, let's be best friends, and it's like, because to me it doesn't come off as anything that changes anything in the relationship besides adding a label, and then all the label means is like you don't like all of your other friends as much as this one person, right? And I'm just like,
Yeah,
I've never felt comfortable with that at all.
yeah, but
And
that's
I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. I don't think that that's unusual at all.
well,
But
that's
people
not.
reporting that have absolutely no friends, yeah.
Yeah, that still doesn't explain the change over time, though. Like,
Oh, right, right.
I don't think it's likely that people in the last few decades have stopped reporting that they have a best friend as frequently because they've had this revelation that you're talking about. That it's,
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know.
that's a good point. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That I get it.
yeah.
Okay, rates of involuntary celibacy. Well, yeah, that's open
Self
shut. I mean,
self-explanatory. Yeah.
that's like, man, I get so upset that we have like people who have the nerve to to shit on people who deny like all kinds of things, but then they themselves deny that like the rates of involuntary celibacy are rising. It's like, I mean, I get it, it's too esoteric, but
Yeah. But yeah, we don't need to. We've covered that ad nauseum. So yeah,
declining academic freedom,
self-explanatory again. Like,
kinda. Do you mean like higher education, like the culture of it?
yes. Mm,
Okay, yeah,
mm.
all right, yeah.
Um,
Declining social trust and civic engagement. See, I think declining social trust is a bad thing. Civic engagement makes me tenuous, right? Because I'm thinking like, I mean, there is an ideal sort of anarcho-capitalist concept of a civic way to have a thing, right? But I always wonder how would that be measured? Like, what does that
yeah.
mean?
Well, there's all the Putnam studies about declining social trust as a function of mostly ethnic tensions, and it's like pretty well established, I think, at this point.
When okay, but I'm curious about this one, right? Because this reminds me of actually it reminds me of Theron Meyer did a little or not a little a whole like presentation about declining social trust in South Africa. I think it was like one of the last like more or less like robust like big
Mm.
things that they put out. You
Yeah,
know,
since apartheid ended. What a strange coincidence.
I know, right? um,
Oh God, I can only imagine what kind of idiotic conclusion she must have drawn from that.
it actually,
Like
I mean,
Ryan
mostly, I
Falk
think it
talks
was,
about this.
if I
It's
recall correctly, I guess it's been, this was at least
thinking
5 or 6 years ago, but I thought it was
thinking
mostly
that
describing the problem and why social
mm,
trust is important and how the decline it's hurt the society, not so much pinning it on a direct change, but I could be mistaken because, like I said, I listened to it
yeah,
2016, I think.
but
By the
like
way, I was right about the year of the Jordan Peterson and Camille Paglia interview. It was October something of
mm,
2017. That's
it's
awesome.
still worth saying though, even though it's been said 1,000 times, that like thinking that segregation is bad is not normal. People don't think it's bad that houses are segregate from each other or that countries are segregate from each other. It takes a tremendous level of brainwashing to, trick people into or coerce people into thinking that good fences don't make good neighbors, right? I just think it's worth observing that.
Right. No, like, because I mean, it's the same thing with discrimination, right? People say discrimination is bad, and I'm like, well, I mean, you discriminate every time you choose one meal over another, or
Yeah,
anything.
exactly.
That's discrimination, you know?
Yeah. And they're never consistent on that because it's impossible to be a functional human being and be consistent on that. And yeah, I don't think Theron Meyer's going to be going back to South Africa anytime soon. For some reason, I don't know.
Because she doesn't want to.
Oh God, I just, I just hate anti-white so much. They just enrage me.
I don't know if I don't remember them being particularly anti-white. I don't. Anyway, I don't. I just
Anyway, yeah.
rising single
So
parenthood. Yep.
self-explanatory, yeah. And
Dysfunctional
so just
social.
to
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
back that up, so originally I had and divorce there because obviously those two kind of go hand in glove. Lots of people
Right.
would say, "Oh, divorce, it's abusive and because of abuse and whatever," but that's not true because if you literally just ask women why they're doing it, why they're getting divorced, the most commonly cited reason is that I fell out of love or I'm just not feeling it anymore. So
Right.
no, it usually doesn't have anything to do with abuse. That's not true. So we can just dismiss that.
Dissatisfaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Dysfunctional social contract between the sexes. Yeah, self-explanatory.
Hey, that's like my whole channel.
Yeah.
Yay.
Mm.
Okay. IQ decline. Hey, that's like my whole
One.
channel.
Yeah.
Yay.
One.
You were
One
supposed to
point.
agree to that.
Yep. 1 point per generation. Self-explanatory. Uh, Mutational load because of relaxed purging selection against.
Oh, this is Dutton's wife, White Whale. We got to put on costumes. Did you bring a costume?
Um. No, but
Anyway,
sorry, I didn't track that you were
we'll
making a joke
we'll
there.
we'll yeah, we're silly hats when we talk about mutational load next time.
Mm. But yeah, it just goes on and on. Instead of going through the whole list, we could just pick and choose at certain things because I think some things are more interesting or more controversial than others. So the increase in the rates of drug-related deaths, that's actually an interesting one because over the last few decades globally, the increase in there hasn't been a huge rate in the prevalence of increase in the rate of substance abuse disorders in the population, but there have been increased overdoses, drug-related deaths, mostly as an ourworldanddata.org. They have like all kinds of data tables and stuff on this, which lays it all out in a really nice, neat, interesting way. So it's mostly driven by opioids, unsurprisingly, no surprises there. And it isn't just America, it's the whole world. It's in America, the opioid crisis has been a lot more dramatic, obviously. The change over time has been more precipitous, but it's the rest of the world too. It's a general trend across the planet. Um, and Our World in Data, they have a breakdown of rates of drug-related death by the class of drugs. So it's in opioids, it's gone up over the last few decades. Um, Amphetamines, it's actually gone down across the world. The rate of amphetamine-related deaths has decreased, and then cocaine deaths have increased massively, something like fourfold relative to what they were in the past. So that's interesting. So it's mostly driven by coke and opioids. Derek, are you still there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted. Yeah, I was just gonna comment. The fact that it's the opioids and cocaine rather than the amphetamines related to the drug deaths. That's the desperate corner, right? That's like it makes sense that with increasing rise of young people committing suicide, you also see increased rates of the drug-related deaths because they're kind of like in this gray area. They call it the desperate corner, and I like that phrase because it's a visual of making sense of it, and it's not always obvious whether it's kind of one or the other, but they're clearly related. So anyway, basically this checks out. Like the shift in the kind of drug I think makes sense because those are the kinds of drugs you'd be abusing, like if you're like depressed.
Yeah, And like again, instead of just going through all of it, like, can you pick out anything else on there that looks noteworthy to you? Or
Actually, the next one, decreased economic independence thanks to exporting industries abroad. Well, wouldn't this be economic dependence? Oh, decreased economic independence. Sorry about that. I had to put the negative together.
for
Um,
instance, it just
oh, this is
seems,
your mercantilism, your mercantilist argument.
yep.
You and your
So
tariffs. No,
I
we don't
knew,
need
I
them.
knew, I knew we would come to blows on this one.
No, this is
But
fine.
so I'll just briefly, like, economics isn't a huge interest of mine, but I'll just say a couple of things. It always just seemed insane to me that, things like the free movement of capital, for instance, it always just seemed very intuitive to me that the only reason that would be good for you, the only reason you would think that was a good thing for your country, is if your country was basically had if it had bad people, for instance, like a low IQ, low conscientiousness population. Like, for instance, these you know, shitholes in the Middle East and North Africa who they can't get things done on their own, so they import foreign contractors, right, to do stuff for them. Those are the kinds of societies that benefit from free movement of capital. But if you have a society where um, you have a good population, basically, just very crudely and simplistically speaking, then it seems perfectly obvious that you're really only going to be hurt by freedom of movement, free movement of capital. And it also just seems, the second point is, it seems insane to be reliant on another country for something um, as fundamental as energy, for example, like Germany, and which is so reliant on Russia, and that's obviously causing problems now because maybe they thought, oh, we're never going to have a serious conflict of interest with Russia, but now it's happening, and their energy prices are spiking, and it's happening across Europe. So yeah, that's basically that's why I'm a mercantilist for those reasons.
I mean, there's basically two issues, right? The first issue is that these like Western industrialized countries, we have such standards and regulations on everything that it drives up the cost of doing any kind of a business or producing anything for ourselves, which then creates the economic incentive to get things abroad. When in an ideal sense, like it would make a lot more sense to have the independence and to do that, right? There's not nothing to it. It's just that if we're talking about choosing between having things as they are with our regulations and then forcing everybody to pay those prices, right? It's just it lowers the quality of living. It makes everything more expensive. It makes everyone poorer, period, relative to outsourcing it to cheaper labor. Now, the ideal is to deregulate everything such that there's no longer an incentive to compete with the cheaper labor. And
Mhm.
then you build more wealth faster than anything ever. That's the gist of it. It's supply and
Yeah.
demand, and it's lowering costs.
I agree with you that regulations are usually bad and like stifle innovation and such. So we're in agreement on that. And that
Yeah,
you
like
could,
I was trying to explain how like you don't need a Federal Reserve to have this arbitrary level of inflation that corrals us all into one currency. Like it's absolutely okay for things to be deflationary and for people to then just be automatically rewarded for saving money. Like that's not a bad thing. For people they're just like no. Like and I don't I don't know, I can't put my brain around it. Like that sounds fine to me. But anyway.
hmm,
Okay, we got time for maybe like one more of these before I
hmm,
switch everything over. Let's see,
your
increasing crime is
choice.
fine. Military, let's see, massive increases in rate of mental. Hmm. Oh yeah, blandification of architecture. That's you. That's you. You hate the brutalism.
Well,
Um,
no. So just quickly to address that, when I say blandification of architecture, I don't mean that I want everything to be traditional architecture everywhere. What I mean is that it's I'd like more diversity, ironically, basically, in building styles. And I think we have a problem now where everything is becoming really homogenized, where the buildings just kind of look the same everywhere. There's like an industry standard all over the planet, and it's making everywhere look the same. Whereas ideally, I'd like to see cities with a big range and like a patchwork of different styles: brutalism, traditionalist buildings, modernist buildings, whatever. So when I say blandification, I don't mean we need to just return to traditional buildings being everywhere. I mean that we need more variety.
Oh, I see what you mean. So yeah, I guess I got off onto a little bit of a tangent because I was just remembering this video that Morgoth did, right? He was
Hmm.
like going through he was like he was kind of framed it as like a conspiracy, right? To like make us accept
Depressed? Oh,
to make us accept like a dystopian world because you look around and everything is like Minecraft blocks, right?
yeah.
Right? And I thought that was interesting. But you mean it actually in well, I got kind of a broader sense, not specifically that there's this sort of a specific movement that's dominating. I mean, because it seems like there's kind of an egg in each basket. Like I don't think Morgoth is wrong. I think that he was just
Yeah.
dramatizing it a little, right? Um,
So you wanted to say something about gender dysphoria thing? I think you sounded like you
oh,
were interested
well,
in that.
I saw the one. I don't know. I mean, I guess this one does kind of speak for itself. Increases in the rate of mental illnesses, which barely existed 30 years ago. I mean, this one you could look at in multiple different ways, right? Because I remember you had mentioned like PTSD is an interesting concept because there doesn't seem to be documentation of ancient like PTSD, right?
Right.
Eh, yeah, so even like gender dysphoria is a great topical example, but there's actually this is a deep rabbit hole, I think. But I
Oh
wanted to
yeah.
ask you what you mean by the world mob. You mean Globo Homo? You
Oh
mean the
right.
Illuminati?
No, this is so like maybe we could table the discussion of gender dysphoria for another stream because I do think that's an interesting topic and rabbit hole unto itself. Like it wouldn't take up a whole stream though. I just think it's something else we could talk about at some point.
Yeah.
Because where I am with this now is actually quite complex and I have various thoughts about it. But no, the world mob thing is this is Robin Hansen's idea. He actually coined the phrase. The basic idea is that and I think this is something you as an anarchist will be especially sympathetic with. In the past, we had a self-correcting process with regard to policy of any kind where if the tribe over in the next hill with their leadership, who of course would be different and have distinct sets of interests from your tribe's leadership, if they did something really stupid and destroyed their society, the correction mechanism would be that outsiders would see that and they would know not to make the same mistake in their own society. Whereas now, what we have is we have kind of a world mob, a cosmopolitan world elite, which people call various things like global homo, who have basically a totally homogenous set of interests, no matter where they're from and what their background is. They're all singing from the same hymn sheet, basically, which means basically when they come to a decision about something, and so for example, let's say they make a really terrible decision where it could destroy the world, destroy civilization, there isn't going to be any correction process now because it'll just be implemented pretty much everywhere with the consequence that pretty much everywhere will be equally destroyed. So a recent case test of this was in COVID, whatever you think about COVID. So the elite, regardless of what you think about COVID and whether or not it was real, right? That's beside the point. Just take the mainstream narrative at face value. Um, the elites came to a decision about what was to be done about COVID, and then the whole world just fell into line, pretty much, with very few exceptions. And that sets a dangerous precedent because there were places that wanted to try different things, deviant policies, uh, but they were shut down. Not all of them, not 100%. There were these outliers like Sweden, Vietnam as well, I believe, but they were almost invariably shut down. and I think that's a problem. And Hansen calls that the world mob problem. That's what he calls them.
I mean, it's almost just a monopolization of, well, I guess what, administration? I mean, I don't know what right? I mean, use
Basically,
the
yeah.
most neutral terms. Yeah, like, and if you think about that, like, administration is it's like it's this thing that's like that always kind of pointed to as like it does nothing, but it kind of does everything. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
It's literally it's the underbelly, right? It's like everybody's walking on the street, and the street's just these filthy, dirty streets that need to be cleaned every once in a while. But like that's the administration, and you don't get very far without it, right? That's why they're so frustrating. And the idea that like this kind of a service has a monopoly, right? You know, you add monopoly to any service, people immediately think it's going to be horrific, right? Which I don't believe is necessarily the case, but a world mob, a world administrative mob, yeah, that's horrifying. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Besides COVID, there's got to be other good examples too. I mean, there's nothing like COVID as an example for that, though.
Um. Yeah, I agree.
There's
A
really
lot of
nothing like
people.
it.
Well, a lot of people. I do think the general. This is like going to be an increasing problem, though. Like, for example, mass immigration. I think the world mob, they want that to be standard practice everywhere on Earth. They just began with white countries, but they really want this to be implemented everywhere, and for everywhere on the planet to be a kind of ethnic melting pot. So that would be another example.
Well, and I guess this kind of links back to the discussion on axiology, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's something horrific about a fully homogenized axiology. That's a hive mind. That's like horrible. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And it obviously would lead humans vulnerable to Malthusian extinction, right? The fact that we're not being sufficiently experimental and
Yeah.
pliable in
Mm.
what we do and what we say. Wow, isn't that crazy? That linked together like all three chunks of the stream.
Mm.
Look at us. We're talking about important things.
Yeah.
Jay Willie gave us a few more examples of COVID exception countries, but Belarus, Brazil, and Tanzania. I'm not familiar with any of that, but
Mm.
good to note. But also, he noted this. I'm going to call bullshit on this, Jay Willie. Gender dysphoria is not even unique to humans. Okay, we can talk
Um.
about that later.
Yeah.
We think you're crazy, Jay Willie.
We didn't even have the concept. We didn't even have a concept of gender as being something distinct from sex in humans until a few decades ago. Like it's a
Dogs did. Dogs did. They
yeah.
knew. They just didn't have the words for it.
I don't know what his argument is for that. I guess we could.
I'm curious
Yeah.
about cliffhanger. I thought it'd be an appropriate cliffhanger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got to clock into work. I got about 5 minutes here, but yeah, it was fun to have another stream again. I always say I want to do more streams more often, and then
Yeah.
they're a little infrequent. But
I hope
well,
it hasn't been overly serious because, like, I feel like I've kind of been dominating this.
no, this is a fun. These are fun conversations, and it's a lot of food for thought here too.
Mm.
And I got a few tabs to go through also. I kind of want to re-listen to this Camille Paleo Jordan Peterson thing now. I'm curious.
Yeah, it
I
was
love how
quite
my
good.
like is still there. My like is still there. That always brings me joy to go back to like a video like 5 years later, like, oh yeah, my like is still there.
Does your YouTube still have dislikes? Like, did you install the extension so that you can still see dislikes on videos?
No, I just have the dislike button, but doesn't tell me the number, but I don't care. I never cared about that. There's too much work. I don't even do ad block. It's too hard.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream. Keep it easy.
Okay. See you later.
See ya.